The morning sun filtered through the car windows as 12-year-old Tommy sat in the back seat, his fingers dancing on his knees like he was playing an invisible piano. His mom glanced at him through the mirror and smiled, though worry lines creased her forehead. It was the same worry she carried every single day since Tommy started middle school. Tommy had Down syndrome. Those two words had defined so much of his life, whether he wanted them to or not. But Tommy? He never let it define who he truly was inside. He loved music, especially the piano. He loved chocolate ice cream. He loved his golden retriever, Buddy. And he loved making people smile even when they didn't always smile back. The school parking lot was already filling up with cars. Kids jumped out, backpacks slung over their shoulders, laughing and shouting to their friends. Tommy's mom turned off the engine and looked back at him. "Ready for another day, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Tommy nodded, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. School wasn't easy. It hadn't been easy for a long time now. The other kids didn't understand him. They saw his face, the way he walked a little differently, the way he sometimes took longer to answer questions. They saw Down syndrome first and Tommy second. Sometimes they didn't see Tommy at all. Walking through the hallways was the hardest part. Tommy could hear the whispers. He wasn't deaf and he wasn't stupid, no matter what some kids thought. He heard when they giggled behind their hands. He saw when they nudged each other and stared. He felt every single look that said he didn't belong. But then there was the music room, that small, slightly dusty room at the end of the east hallway, with posters of famous composers on the walls and an old, upright piano sitting in the corner like a faithful friend. That's where everything changed. That's where Tommy became more than what people expected. His music teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was different from everyone else. She was in her 50s with graying hair she wore in a messy bun and reading glasses that hung on a chain around her neck. She never talked down to Tommy. She never used that overly sweet voice that adults sometimes used, the one that made him feel like a baby. She just treated him like any other student who loved music. 3 months ago, Mrs. Patterson had noticed something special. During free practice time, Tommy had sat at the piano and started playing a melody he'd heard on the radio. He played it by ear, finding each note like he was uncovering hidden treasure. His fingers, which sometimes struggled with buttoning his shirt, moved across the keys with surprising grace and confidence. Mrs. Patterson had walked over slowly, not wanting to startle him. When Tommy finished, she simply said, "That was beautiful. Have you been practicing at home?" Tommy had shrugged. "I just like how it sounds. Music makes sense. People don't always make sense, but music does." That moment changed everything. Mrs. Patterson started staying after school twice a week to teach Tommy properly. She showed him how to read sheet music, how to position his hands, how to feel the emotion behind each piece. And Tommy soaked it all up like a sponge. At home, his parents had scrimped and saved to buy a keyboard. It wasn't fancy, just a basic electric keyboard from the discount store, but to Tommy it might as well have been made of gold. He practiced every single day, before school, after school, sometimes even sneaking downstairs in the middle of the night when a melody filled his head and wouldn't let him sleep. His dad would wake up sometimes and hear the soft notes floating up the stairs. He'd stand in the hallway in his pajamas just listening, amazed at what his son could do. His mom would record videos on her phone, crying happy tears as she watched Tommy's face light up while he played. But the world outside their home wasn't always so kind. Just last week, Tommy had been walking to lunch when he heard a group of older boys talking. They were 8th graders, the cool kids who wore expensive sneakers and had perfect hair. Tommy usually tried to avoid them, but the hallway was crowded and he couldn't turn around without making it obvious. "Dude, did you see the talent show sign-up sheet?" one of them said, loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Yeah, the usual stuff. Some girl's doing a dance, that kid with the guitar who thinks he's a rock star," another replied. Then the third one laughed, a mean kind of laugh that made Tommy's stomach hurt. "And get this, the special ed kid signed up. This should be good. I mean, what's he gonna do? Drool on stage?" The other boys cracked up and Tommy felt his face get hot. He wanted to say something, to tell them he had a name, that he was a person, that he could do things they probably couldn't. But the words stuck in his throat like always. Instead, he just kept walking, his head down, his chest tight. That afternoon, he didn't go to lunch. He went straight to the music room, his safe place, his sanctuary. The room was empty, and Tommy was grateful for that. He sat at the piano bench, placed his hands on the familiar keys and started to play. The notes that came out weren't happy ones. They were sad and angry and confused. His fingers pressed harder than usual, the music loud and intense. He poured everything he felt into that piano, every hurt word, every mean laugh, every time someone looked at him like he was less than human. Mrs. Patterson found him there 20 minutes later. She didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway listening. When Tommy finally stopped playing, his shoulders shaking with held-back tears, she walked over and sat beside him on the bench. "Tough day?" she asked gently. Tommy nodded, not trusting his voice. "You know what I've learned in my 53 years on this planet?" Mrs. Patterson said, looking at the piano keys instead of at Tommy. "Some people are so afraid of anything different that they try to make themselves feel bigger by making others feel small. It's not about you, Tommy. It's about them and their own fears." Tommy finally looked at her. "But it still hurts. I know, sweetheart. I know it does." She put her hand on his shoulder. "But here's the thing. You have a gift. A real, genuine gift. And when you share that gift with the world, you have the power to change how people see you. Music speaks louder than words ever could." Tommy thought about the talent show. He'd signed up on impulse, excited about the idea of performing. He hadn't thought about the boys who would laugh, the people who would stare, the audience who would see his Down syndrome before they heard his music. "What if I mess up?" he whispered. Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Then you mess up. But what if you don't? What if you get up on that stage and show everyone what you're really made of? What if you play so beautifully that they forget every mean thing they ever thought?" Tommy sat there for a long moment, his fingers resting on the keys. The piano had never judged him. It never cared about his diagnosis or how he looked or how long it took him to tie his shoes. The piano only cared about one thing, the music he could create. "I want to do it," he said finally, his voice stronger now. "I want to play in the talent show." Mrs. Patterson's smile grew wider. "Then let's make sure you're ready to blow everyone away." And so they began to practice in earnest. Tommy chose a piece that Mrs. Patterson had introduced him to months ago, a beautiful flowing melody that seemed to dance and sing. It was challenging, maybe too challenging for someone at his level. But Tommy was determined. He practiced until his fingers ached. He practiced until he could play it in his sleep. He practiced until the music became a part of him. His parents watched with a mixture of pride and fear. They were so proud of their son's courage, his determination, his incredible talent. But they were also terrified. Terrified of what might happen if things went wrong. Terrified of seeing their boy hurt again. Terrified that the world's cruelty might finally break his beautiful spirit. But Tommy had made up his mind. He was going to walk onto that stage, sit at that piano, and show everyone exactly who he was. Not the boy with Down syndrome. Not the kid from special ed. Not the target of their jokes and whispers. Just Tommy. A boy who loved music and had something important to say, even if he said it without words. The talent show was 3 weeks away, and Tommy was ready to change everything. The school bulletin board was covered with colorful flyers announcing the annual talent show. "Show us your talent," they screamed in bold letters with a cartoon spotlight shining down. For most kids at Lincoln Middle School, it was the event of the year. A chance to show off, to be in the spotlight, to finally prove you were cool. For Tommy, it meant something entirely different. It meant hope. A tiny, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, people would finally see him for who he really was. The day after he signed up, Tommy walked through the hallways with his head held a little higher. He clutched his books to his chest and tried not to think about what people were saying. But it was hard to ignore. The whispers seemed louder than usual. In his history class, he sat in his usual spot near the front. Mrs. Henderson was droning on about the Civil War when Tommy heard the snickering behind him. 2 girls were passing a note back and forth, covering their mouths to hide their giggles. Tommy tried to focus on the teacher, but his ears burned. At lunch, things got worse. The cafeteria was its usual chaotic mess of clattering trays, shouting voices, and the smell of pizza and French fries. Tommy got his food and looked for a place to sit. He usually sat with a few other kids from his resource classes, the other students who needed a bit of extra help. They were kind to him, but Tommy sometimes wished he could just blend in with everyone else. As he walked past the popular table, the one where the 8th grade boys sat like kings surveying their kingdom, he heard his name. Well, not exactly his name. "Yo, check it out. The talent show is going to be lit this year," one boy said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. His name was Brandon, and he was the kind of kid who thought being mean made him funny. He had gelled hair and wore a varsity jacket even though he'd only played on the JV basketball team for like 3 games. Why? Is someone actually good signing up? Another boy asked. This one was Brandon's sidekick, a kid named Jake who laughed at everything Brandon said even when it wasn't funny. Nah, man. It's gonna be funny as hell. You know that special ed kid? The one who's always by himself. He signed up to play piano or something. Brandon's voice carried across the cafeteria, loud enough for at least 20 kids to hear. Jake's eyes widened with fake surprise. No way, dude, this is gonna be hilarious. My mom's making me go to support school spirit or whatever, but at least now we'll have something to laugh at. A third boy, quieter than the others but still part of their group, shifted uncomfortably. That's kinda messed up, man. What if he's actually good? Brandon snorted. Come on, Tyler, be real. The kid probably can't even tie his own shoes. You really think he can play piano? It's gonna be a disaster and I'm here for it. Someone needs to record it so we can put it on social media. The table erupted in laughter, and Tommy felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. He stood there frozen, his tray trembling in his hands. Part of him wanted to walk over there and tell them they were wrong. Part of him wanted to run away and never come back. Instead, he just turned and walked to his usual table, his appetite completely gone. His friend David, a kid with thick glasses who was in his math support class, noticed right away. You okay, Tommy? You look upset. Tommy set down his tray and slumped in his seat. They're making fun of me. About the talent show, David frowned. Who? Those jerks at the popular table? Tommy nodded, staring at his pizza like it might have the answers to all his problems. Don't listen to them, David said firmly. Those guys are idiots. Brandon failed 3 classes last year. My brother told me. He's not exactly a genius himself. Tommy appreciated David trying to make him feel better, but the words still hurt. They hurt because they weren't new. He'd heard variations of them his whole life. People always assumed he couldn't do things. They assumed he was less smart, less capable, less everything, and usually they didn't even try to hide it. The rest of lunch passed in a blur. Tommy barely touched his food. When the bell rang, he gathered his things slowly, letting the crowd of students rush past him. He had English next, but his feet carried him somewhere else instead. Somewhere safe. The music room was empty during lunch periods. Mrs. Patterson was probably in the teacher's lounge, eating the salad she brought from home every day. The room was quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sounds of students in the hallways. Tommy set his backpack down and walked to the piano like he was being pulled by an invisible string. He sat on the bench and for a moment he just looked at the keys. Black and white, perfectly arranged, always the same. The piano never changed its mind about him. It never whispered behind his back. It never laughed at him. He placed his hands on the keys and started to play. Not the piece he'd been practicing for the talent show, but something else. Something that came from deep inside. A melody that matched the ache in his chest. His fingers moved slowly at first, finding notes that felt like sadness and hurt and confusion. Then faster, pouring out everything he couldn't say with words. The music filled the empty room, echoing off the walls. Tommy closed his eyes and let himself disappear into the sound. When he played, he wasn't the kid people made fun of. He wasn't the boy with Down syndrome who didn't quite fit in. He was just a person creating something beautiful, and that was enough. He didn't hear the door open. He didn't hear Mrs. Patterson come in and stand quietly at the back of the room listening. He didn't see the way her eyes filled with tears as she recognized the pain in his music. He just played, letting the piano say everything his voice couldn't. When he finally stopped, the room felt too quiet. Tommy opened his eyes and wiped them quickly, not wanting anyone to see that he'd been crying. But then he heard a soft sound behind him and turned to see Mrs. Patterson standing there. "How long have you been here?" he asked, embarrassed. "Long enough," she said gently, walking over to him. "Tommy, that was incredible. I've never heard you play like that before. So much emotion." Tommy shrugged, looking down at his hands. "I was just playing how I feel." Mrs. Patterson sat down on the bench beside him. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" And suddenly it all came pouring out. Tommy told her about Brandon and Jake, about the things they'd said, about how everyone seemed to think his talent show performance would be a joke. He told her how tired he was of being seen as different, how much he wished people would just give him a chance. Mrs. Patterson listened to every word, nodding slowly. When Tommy finished, she was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "You know what those boys are afraid of?" she finally said. "They're afraid that you're going to get up on that stage and prove that they've been wrong about you this whole time. They're afraid that you're going to be amazing and they won't have you to make fun of anymore." Tommy looked at her, doubt clear in his eyes. "You really think that's it?" "I know it is," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Tommy, I've been teaching for 30 years. I've seen every kind of student you can imagine. And I've learned that the ones who are cruelest are usually the ones who are most insecure. They tear others down because they're afraid of being torn down themselves." Tommy thought about this. It was hard to imagine Brandon being afraid of anything. He seemed so confident, so sure of himself. "But here's the thing," Mrs. Patterson continued. "You have something they don't have. You have a gift. A real, genuine gift for music. And when you play, Tommy, magic happens. People stop seeing everything else. They just hear the music and feel the emotion behind it. That's power. That's real power." Tommy felt a tiny spark of hope flicker in his chest. "Do you really think I can do this? Do you think I can actually get up there and play in front of everyone?" Mrs. Patterson put her hand on his shoulder and looked him straight in the eyes. "I don't just think you can do it. I know you can. But more importantly, do you know you can?" Tommy took a deep breath. He thought about all the hours he'd spent practicing. He thought about how music made him feel, how it was the one place where he felt completely himself. He thought about his parents who believed in him even when the world didn't, and he thought about that piano, his faithful friend, that would be right there with him on that stage. "Yeah," he said softly, then stronger. "Yeah, I can do this." Mrs. Patterson smiled, the kind of smile that lit up her whole face. "That's my student. Now let's get back to work. We've got a performance to perfect, and I want you to blow everyone away." For the rest of lunch and through his free period, Tommy and Mrs. Patterson practiced. She helped him refine his technique, smooth out the rough spots, and most importantly, she helped him believe in himself. By the time the final bell rang and students started flooding the hallways, Tommy felt different. Still nervous, still worried, but also determined. He was going to do this. He was going to walk onto that stage and show everyone what he was made of, and maybe, just maybe, he'd change some minds along the way. That night, Tommy's mom lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling while her husband snored softly beside her. The digital clock on her nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m., but sleep felt impossible. Her mind kept spinning with worry, playing out 100 different scenarios of what could go wrong at the talent show. She thought about all the times Tommy had come home from school with that sad look in his eyes, the one he tried to hide but never quite could. She remembered the day in 3rd grade when he'd asked her why the other kids didn't want to play with him at recess. She remembered having to explain, in the gentlest way possible, that some people didn't understand that different didn't mean less. Being Tommy's mom was the greatest joy of her life, but it was also the hardest thing she'd ever done. Every day was a battle between letting him spread his wings and wanting to wrap him in bubble wrap to protect him from the world's cruelty. The talent show felt like the biggest risk yet. What if he froze up on stage? What if he made a mistake and the kids laughed? What if this moment that was supposed to be special turned into another painful memory? Could she let him go through with it, knowing how much it might hurt? She must have finally dozed off because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through the curtains and she could hear sounds from downstairs. She checked the clock. 6:30 in the morning. Way too early for a Saturday. When she went downstairs, she found Tommy sitting at the keyboard they'd set up in the corner of the living room. He had his headphones on so he didn't hear her come down the stairs. His fingers moved across the keys with complete focus, his body swaying slightly with the music only he could hear. Tommy's mom stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching her son. His face was completely peaceful, lost in his own world of melody and harmony. This was when he was happiest, she realized. Not when people were praising him or telling him he was special, but when he was simply creating music. She thought about what her own mother had told her years ago, when Tommy was first born, and the doctors had given them the diagnosis. Her mother had held her while she cried and said something that stuck with her forever. This child is going to teach you things about love and courage that you never knew existed. He's going to face a harder road than most, but if you let him walk it, he'll show you what strength really means. Standing there in her bathrobe, watching her 12-year-old son practice piano at 6:30 on a Saturday morning, she finally understood what her mother meant. Tommy wasn't fragile. He was strong, maybe stronger than she'd given him credit for. When Tommy finally took off his headphones and noticed her standing there, he jumped a little. "Mom, you scared me. Did I wake you up?" She walked over and kissed the top of his head. "No, sweetie. I just heard you practicing and came to listen. You sounded beautiful." Tommy smiled that smile that always melted her heart. "I wanted to get some extra practice in. Mrs. Patterson says the more I practice, the more confident I'll feel." His mom sat down on the couch, watching him. "Tommy, can we talk about the talent show?" Tommy's smile faded a little, and she saw worry flash across his face. "Are you going to tell me I can't do it?" "No," she said quickly. "No, that's not what I meant. I just want to make sure you're doing this for the right reasons. Are you doing it because you love music and want to share that? Or are you doing it to prove something to the kids who've been mean to you?" Tommy thought about this for a moment, his hands resting on the keyboard. "Maybe both?" he said honestly. "I love playing piano. It makes me happy, but also I'm tired of people thinking I can't do stuff. I want to show them they're wrong." His mom nodded slowly. "I can understand that. But here's what I need you to know, okay? Whether you play perfectly or make 100 mistakes, whether people clap or they don't, it doesn't change who you are. You are talented and wonderful and special, and that's true no matter what happens on that stage." Tommy's eyes got a little watery. "But what if I mess up? What if everyone laughs at me?" "Then we'll deal with it together," his mom said firmly. "But Tommy, what if you don't mess up? What if you get up there and play so beautifully that everyone stops thinking about everything else and just listens to the music? What if you surprise everyone, including yourself?" Tommy wiped his eyes. "Mrs. Patterson said almost the same thing." "That's because Mrs. Patterson is a smart lady," his mom said with a smile. "And because we both see what you're capable of, even when you doubt yourself." Later that morning, Tommy's dad came downstairs to find both of them sitting at the keyboard. Tommy was showing his mom the piece he planned to play, explaining the different parts and why he loved it so much. His dad stood in the doorway listening and felt his chest tighten with emotion. That afternoon, the whole family went to the park. They brought Buddy, their golden retriever, who ran around chasing tennis balls and making Tommy laugh. For a few hours, they didn't talk about the talent show or school or anything stressful. They just enjoyed being together. But that evening, after dinner, Tommy's parents had a serious conversation in the kitchen while Tommy was upstairs doing homework. "I'm terrified," his mom admitted, loading plates into the dishwasher. "I know we're supposed to let him do this, let him take this risk, but what if it goes badly? What if those cruel kids hurt him even more?" Tommy's dad wrapped his arms around her. "I'm scared too," he said quietly. "But you know what scares me more? The idea of Tommy being 40 years old and looking back at his life, wishing he'd taken chances but being too afraid because we never let him try." His wife leaned against him. "When did our little boy get so brave?" "He's always been brave," Tommy's dad said. "We're just finally seeing it." Upstairs, Tommy sat at his desk, supposedly working on a math worksheet but actually thinking about the talent show. It was only 2 weeks away now. 2 weeks until he'd stand on that stage in front of hundreds of people. 2 weeks until he'd either prove himself or confirm everyone's worst assumptions. He looked at the poster on his wall, a picture of a famous pianist his grandma had given him. The quote at the bottom said, "Music is the universal language of mankind." Tommy liked that quote. It meant that when he played, he was speaking in a language everyone could understand even if they didn't understand him. He thought about Brandon and Jake and all the other kids who'd laughed at him. He thought about the whispers in the hallway and the giggles behind his back. And then he thought about the piano, waiting for him in the music room, ready to help him tell his story. Tommy made a decision then. He wasn't going to play it safe. He wasn't going to choose an easy piece just to avoid mistakes. He was going to play the piece he loved, the one that challenged him, the one that made his heart sing. And he was going to play it with everything he had. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of practice and preparation. Tommy spent every free moment at the piano. At school, he practiced during lunch and after classes. At home, he practiced before breakfast and after dinner. His fingers learned every note, every rhythm, every subtle change in dynamics. Mrs. Patterson pushed him harder than she ever had before, but also supported him more. She stayed late after school, working with him on the difficult passages, helping him understand not just the notes but the emotion behind them. She taught him about the composer who wrote the piece, about what he was feeling when he created it, about how music could tell a story without words. Music isn't just about playing the right notes, she told him one afternoon. It's about feeling something and making other people feel it too. When you sit at that piano, I want you to forget about the audience. Just play for yourself, play what you feel, and let that emotion flow through your fingers. Tommy practiced this too. He learned to close his eyes and imagine he was alone in the music room, just him and the piano and the music. He learned to let go of his worries and fears and just feel. His classmates noticed how much time he was spending in the music room. Some of them thought it was weird. Others were curious. And a very few, started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to Tommy than they'd assumed. One girl from his English class, a quiet kid named Rachel who usually kept to herself, stopped by the music room one day while Tommy was practicing. She stood in the doorway for a moment listening before speaking up. "That's really pretty," she said softly. Tommy stopped playing and turned around, surprised. Most kids didn't talk to him unless they had to. "Thanks," he said, not sure what else to say. Rachel stepped into the room a little. "Is that what you're playing for the talent show?" Tommy nodded. "I think it's cool that you signed up," Rachel said. "I wish I was brave enough to do something like that." Before Tommy could respond, she gave him a small smile and left. It was a brief interaction, barely 2 minutes long, but it meant the world to Tommy. Someone, just one person, had said something kind without being asked to. Someone thought he was brave. That night, lying in bed with Buddy curled up at his feet, Tommy felt something shift inside him. He was still nervous about the talent show. He was still worried about making mistakes or people laughing. But underneath all of that, there was something else now, a quiet confidence, a belief that maybe, just maybe, he could actually do this. He fell asleep thinking about music, about the feel of the piano keys under his fingers, the way a beautiful melody. The morning of the talent show arrived with a gray, cloudy sky that matched Tommy's nervous stomach. He'd barely slept, tossing and turning all night, running through the piece in his mind over and over. Every time he'd close his eyes, he'd see himself on stage, but the dream would always end before he started playing. His brain wouldn't let him see how it turned out. At breakfast, Tommy couldn't eat more than a few bites of toast. His parents tried to act normal, chatting about the weather and weekend plans, but he could see the worry in their eyes. They were trying so hard to be brave for him, which somehow made him want to be brave for them too. "You're going to do great, buddy," his dad said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "Just remember, we're proud of you no matter what." Tommy nodded, not trusting his voice. The lump in his throat felt like it might choke him if he tried to speak. The talent show wasn't until 7 that evening, which meant Tommy had an entire day to spiral with anxiety. He tried to distract himself by playing video games, but he kept losing focus. He tried watching TV, but couldn't follow the plot. Finally, around noon, his mom suggested they take Buddy for a walk. The fresh air helped a little. Buddy's excitement was contagious, and watching him chase squirrels and sniff every tree made Tommy smile despite his nerves. They walked to the park and sat on a bench while Buddy explored. "You know what I remember about my wedding day?" his mom said suddenly. "I was so nervous that morning I threw up twice. I was convinced I'd trip walking down the aisle or forget my vows or something would go horribly wrong." Tommy looked at her, surprised. He'd seen the wedding photos. His mom had looked beautiful and happy. "Really? But you looked so calm in the pictures." "That's the thing about being nervous," his mom said with a smile. "Everyone's nervous before big moments. But once you're actually doing the thing you're nervous about, the nerves usually fade away. You get caught up in the moment and your body just takes over and does what it's been trained to do." Tommy thought about this. His fingers knew the piece. He'd played it hundreds of times. Maybe she was right. Maybe once he actually started playing, the fear would disappear. By 5 o'clock, it was time to head to the school. The talent show started at 7, but performers had to be there early for a quick rehearsal and to get organized backstage. Tommy's stomach did flips the entire car ride. Lincoln Middle School looked different in the early evening. The parking lot was already starting to fill up with families. Inside, the hallways buzzed with energy. Kids in costumes rushed past, parents carried props, and teachers tried to maintain some sense of order. Tommy headed to the auditorium while his parents went to find seats. The backstage area was chaos. A group of girls in matching dance outfits were practicing their moves in the corner. A boy with a guitar was tuning it frantically. Two kids were arguing about who got to use the mirror, and in the middle of it all stood Mr. Rodriguez, the drama teacher who was coordinating everything, looking like he might have a nervous breakdown at any moment. "Tommy, there you are." Mrs. Patterson appeared beside him, her hair more wild than usual. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Tommy admitted. Mrs. Patterson laughed. "Good, that means you care. Come on, let's find you a quiet spot." She led him to a corner away from the chaos where some folding chairs had been set up. Tommy sat down, his hands trembling slightly in his lap. This was really happening. In less than 2 hours, he'd be on that stage. The rehearsal was quick and disorganized. Each act got about 2 minutes on stage to check their props, test the microphone, whatever they needed. When it was Tommy's turn, he walked out onto the empty stage and looked at the piano waiting there. It wasn't the familiar upright from the music room. This was a grand piano, sleek and black and kind of intimidating. "Go ahead, Tommy. Play a few measures so we can check the sound," Mr. Rodriguez called from the audience. Tommy sat at the bench and placed his hands on the keys. They felt different, smoother than the ones he was used to. He started to play his piece, but Mr. Rodriguez stopped him after just a few seconds. "Great, that's perfect. Next performer." And just like that, his rehearsal was over. Tommy walked back to the wings, his heart pounding. 2 minutes hadn't been enough. He'd barely gotten a feel for the piano. What if it played differently than he was used to? What if he couldn't adjust? Mrs. Patterson must have seen the panic on his face because she quickly pulled him aside. Hey, it's okay. Listen to me. A piano is a piano. Your fingers know what to do. Trust yourself." Tommy took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Around him, the other performers seemed so confident. The dancers were laughing and taking selfies. The kid with the guitar was chatting with his friends. Even the girl who was going to sing looked nervous but excited. And then Tommy saw them. Brandon and Jake walking backstage like they owned the place. They weren't performing, so they weren't supposed to be back here, but no one seemed to notice or care. Brandon spotted Tommy immediately. A mean grin spread across his face and he elbowed Jake. They walked over and Tommy felt his stomach drop. Well, Brandon said, loud enough for several people nearby to hear. "If it isn't the star of the show. You ready for your big moment, buddy?" The way he said buddy made it clear he didn't mean it in a friendly way. Tommy looked down at his shoes, wishing he could disappear. "What's wrong? Not gonna say anything?" Brandon continued. "That's probably smart. Save your energy for the performance. You're gonna need it." Jake laughed, doing an exaggerated imitation of how Tommy walked, his movements jerky and mocking. A few other kids nearby noticed and started watching. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything. "Come on, let's see a preview," Brandon said. "Play us something on that fancy piano." "Oh wait, you probably can't even reach the pedals, right?" Tommy felt tears stinging his eyes. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. They never came when he needed them most, that's enough. The voice was quiet but firm. Tommy looked up to see Tyler, the third boy from Brandon's lunch table, standing there with his arms crossed. "What?" Brandon turned to him, surprised. "Dude, we're just having fun." "No, you're being a jerk," Tyler said. "Why don't you just leave him alone?" Brandon stared at his friend like he'd grown a second head. "Are you serious right now?" "Yeah, I am," Tyler said. He looked at Tommy. "Good luck tonight, man. I hope you do great." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Brandon and Jake standing there looking confused. After a moment, they left too, muttering to each other, but the damage was already done. Tommy's confidence, already shaky, had taken a serious hit. Mrs. Patterson appeared instantly, having witnessed the whole thing. "Don't let them get in your head," she said firmly. "Those boys don't matter. The only thing that matters is you and that piano and the music you're about to share." Tommy nodded, but inside he was crumbling. What was he thinking? He couldn't do this. He wasn't good enough. Everyone was going to laugh, just like Brandon predicted. In the auditorium, families were starting to fill the seats. Tommy's parents had scored spots in the third row. His mom kept checking her phone, texting his dad updates even though he was sitting right next to her. She couldn't help it. Her anxiety had anxiety. Around them, other parents chatted excitedly. Kids ran up and down the aisles until teachers told them to sit down. The energy in the room was electric, anticipatory. Everyone loved the talent show. It was tradition. It was fun. It was a chance to support the kids and see what they'd been working on. But scattered throughout the audience were also the people who came for different reasons. The ones who wanted to see the train wrecks. The ones who would post videos online if someone messed up. The ones who treated the talent show like a comedy show, just waiting for something to laugh at. Brandon and Jake found seats near the back, already pulling out their phones. They had plans to record everything, especially Tommy's performance. It would be hilarious content, they were sure of it. Principal Davis took the stage at 7 o'clock sharp. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a tendency to make bad jokes. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Lincoln Middle School's annual talent show. We have an amazing lineup tonight, and I know you're going to be blown away by the incredible talent our students have. The audience applauded. Principal Davis went through his usual speech about supporting the arts and how proud he was of every student who had the courage to perform. Then he introduced the first act. Backstage, Tommy sat in his folding chair, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles were white. He was third in the lineup. The first act was already on stage, a magic show that was getting polite applause and a few laughs. The second act was waiting in the wings, a group of girls about to do a dance routine. Mrs. Patterson sat down next to Tommy. She didn't say anything, just put her hand on his shoulder. Sometimes presence was more important than words. The magic show ended. The dance routine went on. Tommy could hear the music, the stomping of feet, the audience clapping along. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might explode out of his chest. And then he heard it. Principal Davis's voice over the microphone. Thank you, ladies. That was fantastic. And now we have Tommy Chen performing a piano piece for us. The first note hung in the air like a single drop of water before a rainstorm. Clear, pure, perfect. Then came the second note, and the third, and suddenly the auditorium was filled with music unlike anything most people there had ever heard from a middle school talent show. Tommy's eyes were still closed, his body swaying slightly on the bench as his fingers danced across the keys. The piece he'd chosen was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a composition so beautiful and complex that professional pianists often took years to master it. For a 12-year-old boy to attempt it was ambitious. For a 12-year-old with Down syndrome, most people would have said it was impossible. But Tommy wasn't thinking about what was possible or impossible. He was thinking about the music. Every note was a word he couldn't speak. Every phrase was a feeling he'd kept bottled up inside. The melody flowed from his fingers like it had been living inside him all along, just waiting for this moment to be set free. In the third row, Tommy's mother grabbed her husband's hand so tightly that her nails dug into his skin. Tears were already streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She couldn't move. She could only listen and watch her son transform before her eyes. Tommy's father sat frozen, his throat tight with emotion. He'd heard his son practice this piece 100 times at home. He'd thought it sounded good, beautiful even. But this was different. Under the stage lights, in front of an audience with everything on the line, Tommy wasn't just playing the notes. He was living them, breathing them, becoming them. The whispers had stopped. The giggles had died away. Row by row, person by person, the entire auditorium fell into a stunned silence. The only sound was the piano, filling every corner of the room with music that seemed to reach inside people's chests and squeeze their hearts. Mrs. Patterson stood in the wings, tears rolling down her cheeks. She'd known Tommy had talent. She'd recognized it that first day when he'd played by ear in her classroom, but even she hadn't fully understood the depth of what he was capable of until this moment. This wasn't just technical skill. This was art, this was soul. This was everything she'd spent 30 years trying to teach students about music, embodied in one 12-year-old boy who the world had tried to tell her couldn't possibly achieve greatness. In the back row, Brandon sat with his phone in his hand, forgotten. He'd been ready to record Tommy's failure, to capture the moment when the special ed kid crashed and burned on stage. His finger had been hovering over the record button when Tommy started playing, but now his hand had dropped to his lap. The mean smirk had slipped off his face, and he was just sitting there listening, feeling something he couldn't name. Next to him, Jake had gone completely still. His usual smart-aleck expression was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. Neither boy said a word to each other. They just listened. 3 rows ahead of them, Tyler sat with his mother. He'd told her earlier that week about what he'd witnessed, about Brandon mocking Tommy, about how he'd finally stood up to his so-called friend. His mother had been proud of him, Now, listening to Tommy play, Tyler felt something shift inside him. He'd done the right thing standing up for Tommy, but he also realized he should have done it a long time ago. How many times had he laughed at Brandon's cruel jokes? How many times had he stayed silent when he should have spoken up? Around the auditorium, people were having their own private moments of realization. Parents who'd brought their kids to the talent show out of obligation were suddenly grateful they'd come. Teachers who'd seen Tommy in the hallways and made assumptions were questioning everything they thought they knew. Students who'd never given him a second thought were seeing him, really seeing him for the first time. The music swelled and dipped, fast passages giving way to slow, tender moments. Tommy's fingers flew across the keys during the challenging parts, never hesitating, never doubting. When the melody softened, his touch became so gentle it was like watching him handle something precious and fragile. The piece built toward its climax, the music growing more intense, more passionate. Tommy's whole body moved with the emotion of it, his face showing every feeling he was pouring into the performance. He was completely lost in the music now, transported to somewhere beyond the stage, beyond the judgment, beyond everything except the pure joy of creation. And then, like a wave retreating from the shore, the music began to soften. The final phrases came slowly, each note placed with perfect care. Tommy's hands moved across the keys one last time, drawing out the ending, making every person in that auditorium hold their breath as they waited for the final note. When it came, soft and sweet and impossibly beautiful, it seemed to linger in the air forever. Tommy held his hands on the keys for a moment after the sound had faded, his eyes still closed, his heart still in the music. Then, slowly, he opened his eyes. The auditorium light seemed too bright after the darkness behind his eyelids. For a split second, Tommy couldn't remember where he was. Then reality rushed back. The stage. The audience. The talent show. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. The auditorium was completely silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a sound. Tommy sat frozen at the piano bench, suddenly terrified. Was that bad? Did everyone hate it? Was the silence a bad sign? Then from the third row, someone stood up. Tommy's mother, tears streaming down her face, her hands already coming together. The clap of her hands was the loudest sound in the room. Her husband stood next to her, clapping with everything he had. Then Mrs. Patterson emerged from the wings, openly crying now, applauding as she walked onto the stage. And like a wave, like a force of nature that couldn't be stopped, the entire auditorium rose to its feet. Every single person, parents, teachers, students, even the janitor who'd been standing at the back of the room. They all stood and they all clapped. But this wasn't the polite applause they'd given the other acts. This was different. This was thunderous. This was the sound of people who'd just witnessed something extraordinary. This was the sound of minds being changed, of hearts being opened, of assumptions being shattered. The applause grew louder, filling the auditorium until it seemed like the walls themselves might shake. People weren't just clapping. They were cheering. They were crying. They were looking at each other with expressions that said, "Did you hear that? Did that really just happen?" Tommy stood up from the piano bench, unsure what to do. Mrs. Patterson had taught him to bow, so he did, a simple, modest bow. The applause somehow got even louder. Some people were whistling now. Others were shouting, "Bravo!" In the back row, Brandon's hands moved mechanically, clapping because everyone else was clapping, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He was thinking about every mean thing he'd said, every joke he'd made, every time he'd assumed Tommy couldn't do something simply because of how he looked. The shame hit him like a physical thing, making his face hot and his stomach sick. Jake had tears running down his face and didn't even realize it. He'd never cried at a talent show before. He'd never cried at any kind of performance. But something about the music, combined with the knowledge of how he'd treated the person who'd created it, broke something open inside him. Tommy's mother was full-on sobbing now, not caring who saw. Her husband had his arm around her, but he was crying too, his face wet with tears he didn't bother to wipe away. They'd known their son was special. They'd always known. But watching the entire school, the entire community, finally see what they'd seen all along was almost too much to bear. The ovation went on and on. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Tommy stood on stage, overwhelmed, not quite believing this was real. He looked out at the audience, and even though the lights made it hard to see clearly, he could make out faces. People standing, clapping, some of them crying, For him, because of his music. Not in spite of his Down syndrome or despite his differences, but because of what he'd created and shared. Principal Davis finally made his way back onto the stage, his own eyes suspiciously shiny. He had to hold up his hand several times before the audience finally quieted down enough for him to speak. "Well," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I think it's safe to say that was extraordinary. Tommy, that was absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing your gift with us." The applause started up again and Tommy quickly walked off stage, his face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and joy. Mrs. Patterson met him in the wings and pulled him into a tight hug. "You did it," she whispered fiercely. "You did it, and you were perfect." Tommy hugged her back and finally, the tears he'd been holding back all night started to fall. But they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of relief, of joy, of feeling truly seen for the first time in his life. The talent show continued, but everyone knew nothing else that night could possibly compare to what they'd just witnessed. The acts that followed were good, some of them quite talented, but the magic of the evening had already happened. Tommy had created a moment that would be talked about for years to come. When the show finally ended and the audience began to file out, something unusual happened. Instead of rushing to their cars, people lingered. They wanted to find Tommy, to tell him how much his performance had moved them. Parents sought him out to introduce their children, to say thank you, to express their amazement. The Saturday morning after the talent show, Tommy woke up to sunlight streaming through his window and Buddy licking his face. For a moment, he thought maybe the previous night had been a dream. The standing ovation, the tears, the people telling him he was amazing. It all seemed too good to be true. Then he heard voices downstairs, more voices than usual for a Saturday morning. Tommy climbed out of bed and padded down the stairs in his pajamas, Buddy trotting beside him. In the living room, he found his parents with his grandparents, his aunt and uncle, and his two cousins. They'd all come over, apparently, just to see him. When they noticed him on the stairs, everyone started clapping and cheering. Tommy felt his face turn red. "What's going on?" His grandmother rushed over and wrapped him in one of her famous hugs, the kind that smelled like flowery perfume and homemade cookies. "What's going on?" "Sweetheart, you're famous. Your mother sent us the video and I must have watched it 20 times already. I cried every single time." "Video?" Tommy looked at his mom. His mother looked a little guilty. "I hope you don't mind, honey. Mrs. Henderson, the history teacher, she took a video of your performance and asked if she could share it. I thought maybe just on the school's page, but Tommy, it's everywhere now. Everyone's watching it." She pulled out her phone and showed him. The video of his performance had been posted to multiple platforms. On one site alone, it had over 50,000 views. The comment section was filled with messages from strangers around the world. "This brought me to tears. What an incredible talent. This is what pure music sounds like. I've been playing piano for 20 years and this kid plays better than me." Tommy stared at the phone, unable to process what he was seeing. 50,000 people had watched him play. 50,000 strangers had seen what happened. His Aunt Julia, who worked in social media marketing, was practically bouncing with excitement. "Tommy, this is incredible. The video is going viral. Local news stations are already calling the school. One of the comments is from a famous concert pianist saying you should have professional training." Tommy felt overwhelmed. He just wanted to play in the school talent show, to prove to the kids who'd made fun of him that he could do something special. He'd never imagined anything like this. "Is this okay?" his dad asked, studying his face. "It's a lot, I know. If you're not comfortable with the video being out there, we can ask people to take it down." Tommy thought about it. Part of him felt exposed, like the whole world was looking at him. But another part of him felt something different, proud, visible in a way he'd never been before. Not as the boy with Down syndrome, but as Tommy the pianist. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I want people to see it." The rest of the weekend was a whirlwind. The local news did call, and on Sunday afternoon a reporter and cameraman came to their house to interview Tommy. He was nervous at first, stumbling over his words, but the reporter was patient and kind. They filmed him playing at his keyboard at home and asked him questions about music and the talent show. "What made you decide to perform?" the reporter asked. Tommy thought for a moment. "I wanted to show people that I can do things. That just because I have Down syndrome doesn't mean I'm not good at stuff. Music is where I feel like myself." The interview aired on Monday Evening News, and suddenly Tommy's phone, which usually only got messages from his parents and maybe Rachel from school occasionally, was flooded with notifications. Kids from school he'd never spoken to were messaging him. His mom's phone kept ringing with calls from local music teachers offering free lessons. A piano store downtown wanted to donate a real piano to replace their keyboard. Monday at school was different. So different that Tommy almost didn't recognize his own life. When his mom dropped him off, several kids called out to him in the parking lot. "Great job, Tommy. You were amazing." "That was so cool." Walking through the hallways felt like being in a movie. People smiled at him. Some stopped to talk to him. Others waved from across the hall. Teachers who'd barely noticed him before congratulated him. The principal stopped him between second and third period to shake his hand and tell him how proud the school was. At lunch, something happened that had never happened before. Tommy got his food and started walking toward his usual table with the other kids from his resource classes, but Rachel intercepted him. "Hey, do you want to sit with us today?" she asked, gesturing to a table where several other kids from their English class sat. Tommy hesitated. These weren't the popular kids exactly, but they were regular kids. Kids who'd never invited him to sit with them before. Kids who probably had their own friend groups and inside jokes and shared history that he wasn't part of. "It's okay if you want to sit with your usual friends," Rachel added quickly, seeing his hesitation. "I just thought maybe you'd want to. You know, mix it up." "Okay," Tommy said, and followed her to the table. The kids there were friendly, asking him questions about the talent show, about how long he'd been playing piano, about whether he was nervous. Tommy answered as best he could, and gradually, the conversation shifted to other things. They talked about classes and teachers and a funny video someone had seen online. They included Tommy naturally, explaining inside jokes when he looked confused, laughing at his comments, treating him like he belonged there. It was nice, really nice, but also a little sad, because Tommy couldn't help wondering where all this friendliness had been before. Why did he have to prove himself on stage for people to want to talk to him? Why couldn't they have been this nice when he was just regular Tommy? Before he was Tommy who went viral, still he tried to focus on the positive. Things were changing. Maybe not for the perfect reasons, but they were changing. Not everyone was happy about Tommy's newfound popularity, though. In the cafeteria, at the table where Brandon and Jake usually held court, there was a noticeable tension. Brandon had been quiet all day, which was unusual for him. He was usually the loudest person in any room, always ready with a joke or a comment. But today he just picked at his food and stared at his phone. "Dude, you okay?" Jake asked. He'd been different too since the talent show. Quieter, more thoughtful. "I feel like crap," Brandon admitted. "Everyone's talking about Tommy like he's some kind of hero, and all I can think about is what we said to him backstage. What I've been saying about him all year?" Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too." They sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Brandon pushed his tray away. "We need to apologize. Like, really apologize." "Tyler already did," Jake pointed out. "Tyler's a better person than us," Brandon said flatly. "But that doesn't mean we can't try to be better too." After school, as Tommy was walking to the music room for his usual practice session with Mrs. Patterson, he heard someone call his name. He turned to find Brandon jogging up to him, Jake following a few steps behind. Tommy's first instinct was to run. These were the boys who'd mocked him, who'd said he'd be a disaster, who'd made him feel small and worthless. But something in Brandon's face stopped him. He looked uncomfortable, nervous even, not at all like his usual confident self. "Hey, Tommy, can we talk for a minute?" Brandon asked. Tommy glanced toward the music room, wanting to escape but also curious. "Okay," he said cautiously. Brandon took a deep breath. "I need to say I'm sorry, not just for what I said backstage before the talent show, but for everything. All the jokes, all the times I made fun of you or laughed at you or said stuff about you. It was wrong. It was really, really wrong." Jake stepped forward. "I'm sorry too. I did the same stuff. We were jerks and you didn't deserve it." Tommy didn't know what to say. He'd imagined this moment before, people apologizing to him, but now that it was happening, he felt confused. Part of him wanted to say it was okay, to accept the apology and move on. But another part of him remembered all the hurt, all the times he'd gone home feeling small and worthless because of what they'd said. "Why now?" Tommy asked quietly. Why are you sorry now and not before? Brandon looked down at his shoes. Honestly? Because I didn't really see you before. I saw someone different, and it was easier to make fun of that than to actually get to know you. And then Friday night, when you played, I realized I'd been completely wrong about you, about what you could do, about who you are. You shouldn't have needed to see me play piano to treat me like a person, Tommy said, and even though his voice was soft, his words hit hard. Brandon's face crumpled a little. You're right. You're absolutely right. I don't have a good excuse. I was a bully, and I'm ashamed of that. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away or anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and I'm going to do better. Tommy looked at both of them, these boys who'd made his life harder for so long. He thought about Tyler, who'd apologized on Friday. He thought about all the people who were suddenly being nice to him now. And he thought about what his mom had told him once, about how forgiveness wasn't about saying what someone did was okay, but about letting go of the weight of the hurt so you could move forward. Okay, Tommy said finally. I accept your apology, but it's going to take time for me to trust you. That's fair, Brandon said, looking relieved. More than fair. As they walked away, Tommy felt something shift inside him. The anger and hurt he'd been carrying around didn't disappear, but it felt a little lighter somehow. 3 weeks after the talent show, the video of Tommy's performance had been viewed more than 5 million times. 5 million. Tommy still couldn't wrap his head around that number. That was more people than lived in his entire city, more people than he'd ever meet in his whole life. All of them watching him, listening to his music, seeing him for who he really was. The attention had been overwhelming at first. News outlets from all over wanted to interview him. Morning shows called, newspapers wrote articles. A popular talk show even reached out, though Tommy's parents politely declined, wanting to keep some sense of normalcy in their son's life. But some opportunities they couldn't say no to. The city's symphony orchestra invited Tommy to attend one of their performances as a special guest. He got to meet the conductor and sit backstage during rehearsal, watching professional musicians bring music to life. It was one of the best days of Tommy's life. Local musicians started reaching out through Mrs. Patterson, offering to mentor him. One was a concert pianist who'd performed all over the world. She met with Tommy twice a month, teaching him advanced techniques and introducing him to pieces he'd never dreamed he could play. The donated piano arrived on a Saturday morning, a beautiful upright that the music store had fully restored. The deliveryman set it up in their living room, and Tommy spent the entire day playing it, marveling at the rich, full sound that was so much better than his little keyboard. His parents stood in the doorway watching him, their hearts so full they could barely speak. But the biggest change wasn't the piano or the views or the opportunities. The biggest change was at school. Lincoln Middle School had transformed, or at least the way people treated Tommy had transformed. And in some ways, that transformation rippled out to affect others too. Mrs. Patterson noticed it first. After Tommy's performance, more students started signing up for music classes. Kids who'd never touched an instrument before wanted to learn piano. The school's small music program suddenly had a waiting list. And it wasn't just music. The special education department reported that more students were making an effort to include kids with disabilities in activities. The invisible walls that had separated different groups of students were starting to crack. Principal Davis decided to make a school-wide initiative out of it. He called it the Everyone Has Talent program. The idea was to celebrate all students' abilities, not just the obvious ones. They started showcasing different students each week, highlighting their unique skills or interests. One week it was a boy who could solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute. Another week, a girl who created beautiful art despite being blind in one eye. Each story reminded students that everyone had something special to offer. Tommy was asked to speak at a school assembly. The idea terrified him at first. Playing piano was one thing. He could lose himself in the music. But standing on stage and talking, that was different. That was harder. Mrs. Patterson helped him prepare. They worked on what he wanted to say, practicing until Tommy felt comfortable with the words. When the day came, Tommy walked onto the stage in front of the entire school, his heart pounding just like it had been during the talent show. He stood at the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces. Some were friends now. Others were still just classmates. But all of them were listening. "Hi," Tommy began, his voice shaking a little. "Most of you know me now because of the talent show. But before that, a lot of you didn't really know me at all, or you thought you knew me, but you only saw Down syndrome. You didn't see Tommy who loves piano and dogs and chocolate chip cookies. You didn't see Tommy who works really hard at things and sometimes succeeds and sometimes doesn't, just like everybody else. He paused, gathering his courage. I used to think that if I could just prove I was good at something, people would finally see me as a real person. And after the talent show, people did start treating me better. But you know what I figured out? I was always a real person. I was always worth being treated with respect. Having a disability doesn't make someone less than human. Being different doesn't make someone less valuable. The auditorium was completely silent. Tommy could see some students nodding. Others looked thoughtful, maybe a little guilty. He took a breath and continued. I'm grateful that things changed for me. I'm grateful people want to be my friend now and that I got all these amazing opportunities. But I also want you all to think about the other kids in this school who are still waiting for someone to see them. The kids who are different in other ways. The ones sitting alone at lunch or being left out of groups. You don't have to wait for them to do something extraordinary to treat them with kindness. Everyone deserves that just for being human. When Tommy finished, the applause was warm and genuine. But more than that, he could see understanding in people's faces. He'd made them think. Maybe that was worth more than any standing ovation. After the assembly, something unexpected happened. A small group of students approached Principal Davis with an idea. They wanted to start a club, something focused on inclusion and friendship. Within a week, the Friendship Club was born. It wasn't a club about disability specifically, though that was part of it. It was about breaking down all the barriers that kept kids separated into different groups, about making sure no one felt invisible or unwanted. Tyler was one of the founding members. He'd been thinking a lot since the talent show about the kind of person he wanted to be. Brandon and Jake joined too, both of them looking for ways to make up for their past behavior. Rachel came to every meeting, quietly organizing activities and bringing ideas. Within a month, the club had over 30 members. They started having lunch together. A big mixed group of kids who normally would never sit at the same table. Popular kids and quiet kids and kids with disabilities and kids who were just trying to find where they fit. They organized activities where everyone could participate, like movie nights with subtitles and audio description, or game tournaments that included accessible options. Tommy joined the club, though he was careful not to let it become the Tommy Show. This wasn't about him specifically. It was about something bigger. About creating the kind of school environment where every kid, regardless of their differences, could feel valued and included. But not everything changed overnight. There were still kids who made thoughtless comments. Still moments when Tommy felt like he was being stared at. Still days when the weight of being different felt heavy on his shoulders. Change was happening, but it was slow. Uneven. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. One afternoon, about a month after the talent show, Tommy was walking to the music room when he heard crying coming from the bathroom. He hesitated, not sure if he should check or just keep walking. But something made him stop. He pushed open the door carefully and found a younger boy, probably a 6th grader, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, tears streaming down his face. The boy looked up, startled, and quickly tried to wipe his eyes. Sorry, I'll go, the boy mumbled, starting to stand. Wait, Tommy said. Are you okay? What happened? The boy hesitated, then slumped back down. Some kids were making fun of me, because I'm small and I'm not good at sports and I like reading instead. They said I was a loser. They said nobody wants to be friends with someone like me. Tommy's heart ached. He knew that feeling so well. He sat down on the floor next to the boy, not caring that the bathroom floor was probably gross. I'm Tommy, he said. What's your name? Ben, the boy answered quietly. Well, Ben, those kids were wrong. Being small doesn't make you a loser. Liking reading doesn't make you weird. Those things are just part of who you are, and who you are is fine exactly as you are. Ben looked at him with red, puffy eyes. Easy for you to say. You're famous now. Everyone likes you, Tommy shook his head. Not everyone. And you want to know a secret? Even with everything that's happened, I still have bad days. I still feel different sometimes. I still hear people whisper. The difference is, now I know my worth doesn't depend on what other people think of me. It depends on what I think of me. But how do you do that? Ben asked, his voice breaking. How do you just not care what people say? I didn't say I don't care, Tommy corrected gently. It still hurts. But I have things that remind me who I am. Music does that for me. It's my place where I feel strong and capable and like myself. What's your thing? What makes you feel that way? Ben thought for a moment. Books, I guess. When I'm reading, I feel like I'm going on adventures. I feel brave, even though I'm not brave in real life. That is brave, Tommy said firmly. Being yourself when other people make fun of you for it. That's the bravest thing there is. Way braver than playing piano in a talent show. Ben managed a small smile. Really? Really, Tommy confirmed. And you know what? There's a club that meets on Thursdays after school. The Friendship Club. It's for anyone who wants to be part of a group where people are nice to each other and everyone's included. You should come. I think you'd fit right in. Ben nodded slowly. Maybe I will. Tommy helped him up and they walked out of the bathroom together. As they parted ways in the hallway, Tommy felt something click into place. This was why everything had happened. Not just so he could become internet famous or get a scholarship or even prove himself to the bullies. It was so he could be here. 6 months after the talent show, Tommy sat at the beautiful donated piano in his living room, his fingers moving through a complicated piece he was preparing for his first recital at the conservatory. Outside, fall leaves were turning gold and orange. And inside, his life had settled into a new kind of normal. The viral video had eventually stopped spreading as internet things do, moving on to the next story, the next viral moment. But the changes it sparked in Tommy's life and at his school had stayed. Some things had even grown stronger, deeper roots taking hold where temporary attention had first planted seeds. At Lincoln Middle School, the Friendship Club was thriving. What had started with about 30 students had grown to over 60. They'd organized 3 school-wide events, including a talent showcase specifically designed to highlight students who didn't fit the traditional definition of talented. A boy who could identify any car by its engine sound, a girl who'd memorized every country's capital, a student who could solve complex math problems in his head, all different, all valuable, all celebrated. The special education department had seen changes too. General education teachers were requesting training on how to better include students with disabilities in their classrooms. The school had implemented a buddy program where students could volunteer to help others who needed support, not as charity, but as friendship. The invisible barriers that had once divided the school into separate worlds were slowly, steadily crumbling. Tommy had settled into his role as the kid who'd sparked the change, though he tried not to let it define him. He was still Tommy who loved piano and dogs and chocolate chip cookies. Still Tommy who struggled with math homework and got nervous speaking in front of groups. Still Tommy who had Down syndrome and all the challenges that came with it. But now he was also Tommy who people saw, really saw when they looked at him. The conservatory program had become one of the best parts of his week. Every Saturday morning, his dad would drive him downtown to the beautiful old building where serious musicians trained. Tommy took classes in music theory, composition, and advanced piano technique. He was almost always the youngest in his classes, and definitely the only student with Down syndrome. But his teachers treated him just like any other student, with high expectations and genuine respect. His main instructor, Professor Chen, was a stern woman in her 60s who'd performed in concert halls all over the world. She didn't believe in false praise or lowering standards. If Tommy played something poorly, she told him. If he wasn't practicing enough, she called him out. But when he played well, when he really connected with a piece, her face would light up with genuine pride. "You have something many technically skilled pianists lack," she told him one day after a particularly emotional run-through of a piece. "You play with your whole heart. You're not just hitting notes, you're telling stories. That's the difference between a good musician and a great one." Tommy had never thought of himself as potentially great. Good maybe, decent for someone with his challenges. But great. That seemed like something reserved for other people, people who weren't like him. "I mean it," Professor Chen said, seeing his doubt. "I've taught hundreds of students. Some had more natural technical ability than you. Some could sight read better or had stronger fingers or better memory. But very few of them had what you have. The gift of making people feel something when you play. That's not something I can teach. Either you have it or you don't. You have it." Those words stayed with Tommy. They became something he held on to on the hard days, when his disability felt like a weight he couldn't shake, when he struggled with things that came easily to others, when he felt frustrated with himself. But there were plenty of good days too. Like the day Ben, the 6th grader he'd found crying in the bathroom, performed at a Friendship Club event, reading an original poem he'd written. The boy who'd been bullied for loving books stood in front of a supportive audience and shared his words, his voice growing stronger with each line. Tommy watched from the audience, clapping so hard his hands hurt, remembering when he'd been in Ben's shoes, or the day when Brandon approached him with something unexpected. They'd maintained a careful, polite distance since Brandon's apology months ago. They weren't friends exactly, but they weren't enemies either. They existed in that space of people who acknowledged each other's humanity without being close. "Hey, Tommy," Brandon said, catching him after school one day.
"Can I ask you something?"
"Sure," Tommy said cautiously. "My little brother, he's 9, and he's been getting bullied at his elementary school. Kids make fun of him because he's dyslexic and has trouble reading. He's starting to hate school, and I don't know what to tell him." Brandon looked genuinely distressed. "I keep thinking about how I treated you and how wrong I was, and I don't want my brother to go through what you went through. But I also don't know how to help him." Tommy felt something soften in his chest. This was growth, real growth. Brandon wasn't just sorry anymore, he was trying to be better, to do better. "Tell him the truth," Tommy said. "Tell him that being different is hard sometimes, and people might not always understand him. But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with him. Tell him to find the thing that makes him feel strong. The thing that reminds him who he really is. For me, it's music. For him, it might be something else." "But everyone has something." Brandon nodded, looking relieved. "Thanks, man, really. And hey, for what it's worth, I'm really glad you didn't let people like me stop you from playing that night. The world would have missed out on something special." After Brandon left, Tommy stood in the hallway for a moment, processing. People could change. Not always, not quickly, but they could. And sometimes all it took was one moment, one performance, one example to start that change rolling. His parents had noticed the changes in him too, not just in his piano playing, but in his confidence, his sense of self. His mom still worried, she probably always would. But her worry had shifted from, can he survive in this world, to, how can we help him thrive in this world? It was a subtle but important difference. His dad had started documenting Tommy's journey in a journal, writing down the milestones and memorable moments, not for fame or attention, but so Tommy could look back someday and remember how far he'd come, so he could see in black and white how he'd transformed not just his own life, but the lives of people around him. The school year progressed, and Tommy found himself in situations he never could have imagined before the talent show. He was invited to play at a community event celebrating people with disabilities. He performed at a fundraiser for the music program. A local magazine did a feature on him, not just about his piano playing, but about his advocacy for inclusion and kindness. But his favorite performances were always the smallest, most intimate ones. Playing for his grandmother on her birthday, her eyes closed as she listened, tears running down her wrinkled cheeks, showing Ben a few basic piano chords during a friendship club meeting, watching the younger boy's face light up as he made music for the first time, sitting at the school piano during lunch, playing for whoever wanted to listen, no pressure, no audience expectations, just music for the joy of it. Mrs. Patterson had become more than just his teacher. She was his mentor, his advocate, his friend. She attended his conservatory recitals, cheering louder than anyone. She continued their after-school practice sessions even though Tommy didn't really need them anymore, simply because they both enjoyed that time together. She'd been the first person to see his potential. And watching him flourish was, she told his parents, the proudest achievement of her 30-year teaching career. "You changed my life too. You know," she told Tommy one day as they were packing up after practice. "You reminded me why I became a music teacher in the first place. Not to create technically perfect performers, but to help students find their voice. You found yours, Tommy, and now you're helping others find theirs." As winter approached and Tommy's first year as the piano kid drew to a close, he reflected on everything that had changed. The video of his performance still got new views and comments every day, new people discovering his story. Some comments made him smile. Others made him think. A few even made him cry, like the mother who wrote that watching his performance had given her hope for her own son with Down syndrome, had helped her see possibilities she'd been afraid to imagine. One evening, sitting at his piano at home with Buddy at his feet and his parents cooking dinner in the kitchen, Tommy played the Chopin piece that had started it all. His fingers knew every note now like old friends. He'd performed it dozens of times since that first night, but it never got old. Each time he played it, he remembered standing on that stage, terrified and brave, about to either prove everyone right or everyone wrong. He'd proven them wrong. But more importantly, he'd proven himself right. He was capable. He was talented. He was worthy of respect and friendship and opportunities, not despite his Down syndrome, not because he'd overcome it, but simply because he was a human being with gifts to share and a voice that deserved to be heard. As he played the final notes, his mom appeared in the doorway, dish towel in hand, that look on her face that meant she was trying not to cry again. She'd been so scared that night 6 months ago.